So far on my channel, I've talked about cosmic experiences, spiritual experiences, healing experiences, and while some of those journeys have been difficult, they have for the most part been positive. Today, I'm going to take a look into the darker side of what can occur within the psychedelic space. And most people would refer to experiences like this as a bad trip. But when they use that phrase, it tends to mean the specific event of the trip itself, as in the hours that you are within the primary effect of the substance that you've taken. Sometimes though, the negative feelings can spill outside of that main experience and ingress into the time when you'd expect to be back to normal. And this can snowball into something that goes on for much longer than the duration of the trip itself, sometimes lasting weeks or even months afterwards. So in this video, I'm going to focus on these darker experiences, why they might occur, and I'll throw in a few of my strategies for getting through them. I'm also going to share my thoughts on why having a bad trip isn't necessarily a bad thing, as sometimes working through these inner demons can be part of this bigger healing journey. Now, it's not my intention to scare people away from trying psychedelics. I think anyone who watches my channel will know that I love psychedelics and my journey with them has been overwhelmingly positive. But I also believe in a no bullshit approach to these topics. And the reality is that it's not always unicorns and rainbows. So, if you're feeling brave, let's get into the dark side of the psychedelic experience. I want to start off by saying that I am of the opinion that these dark experiences and all the negative feelings that can follow them are sometimes necessary as part of a bigger path. And this is certainly true of some of my own journeys in which I went into them pretty much expecting a difficult experience. And in some cases, that's exactly what I got. And I'll talk more about that later. Now, when I say that I expected it to be difficult, this is not me being masochistic. I certainly don't want to suffer unnecessarily. But I was at a point in my life where it was worth putting myself through some discomfort in order to resolve some of the issues that I was having. And in this way, I think of it as very similar to going to the gym. There's no pain, no gain. But as with everything in life, there is no free lunch here. If you want to work through some major issues like depression, anxiety, PTSD, whatever, then you need to understand that you're going to have to wade deep into those dark spaces before you come out of the other side. Something I want to get out of the way up front is the way in which I frame these bad trips as something which can be positive or even necessary. I've seen people have a very visceral and emotional response to statements like this, so I think it's worth taking a moment to clarify. The typical argument here is that if someone goes nuts or kills themselves, then that's a bad trip, and you shouldn't be telling people to go through it. And my response to that is, we aren't really talking about the same thing. The outcome of a trip is not the same thing as the trip itself. Someone could be having the time of their life and be convinced that they've ascended to heaven and so decide to throw themselves off a tall building. Now, the outcome there is clearly bad, but the qualia of the trip itself was pretty awesome up until that point. Likewise, people could be having a fucking amazing time and still suffer a psychotic break. And granted, those things can happen also during bad trips too. But the point is that the outcome of a trip is not the same as the trip itself. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in like a language game here, but hopefully my stance is clear. I'm talking about the feel of the experience, not necessarily the outcome of the experience. I also think it's useful to understand my position on what is going on in these psychedelic experiences and where these negative feelings might come from. I lean more towards the idea that whatever is happening when someone takes one of these substances is a change in consciousness. And by that, I don't mean that we are opening up trans-dimensional portals in our brain or that supernatural spirits are taking over our bodies. When talking about bad trips, you'll often hear people who use the language like, the trip went bad on me, as though the substance itself is some kind of like third-party malevolent force that is like psychologically attacking them. I don't subscribe to that. And likewise, I don't believe in black magic, demons, bad juju, or any other kind of like external entity which people might use to rationalize the cause of bad experiences. Personally, I subscribe to the belief that you only experience what you bring with you. And so if that leads to a scary place, then that's something within you that you need to resolve. And often the only way to do that is to go through it. It's just you. And I actually find that statement much more empowering. You know, if you believe that there's some kind of external supernatural entity out to get you, then there's really no limit as to what that thing can do, and everything bad is its fault and you're just completely helpless. Whereas if you accept that this is you, then you cease to be a victim. You're going to take responsibility for yourself and your life, and you're going to find the courage to face these things down and take control. Not only is this a much healthier mindset, it also means that you don't have to believe in a load of woo-woo superstitious bullshit, which is always a good thing in my opinion. I also want to state that these substances are not for everyone. And I don't mean that in some kind of like elitist, this is just for me. No, what I mean is that these things can fuck you up in ways you cannot even dream of. I mean, just imagine the worst possible hell on a constant loop inside your brain, going on for what seems like forever. You know, I've got it? Does that give you some kind of picture? If it does, it's probably still nowhere even close to how bad this can get. And so if you're someone who has difficulty staying grounded, particularly those with a history of mental illness, then you should probably steer clear of these substances. Okay, I think that's all of my disclaimers out of the way, so let's get into the meat of this topic. What is a dark experience? I tend to group dark psychedelic experiences into one of three categories. So let's start by defining each of those. The first one is what's commonly referred to simply as a bad trip. And this is the one that most people are familiar with. You know, even people who have never taken psychedelics personally will likely have heard a story about some dude who freaked out after taking something and ended up doing something crazy. A bad trip is simply an experience which is mostly characterized by an unpleasant or disturbing subjective feel to it. And this can range from like persistent feelings that something is not quite right, through to very disturbing visions of hell-like realms populated by demonic entities. The thing that makes it so scary is that you cannot escape from it. It is happening directly within your consciousness. So you can't even close your eyes or run away from it. It's happening to you no matter what you do. It's kind of like real-time 4K live TV beamed directly into your brain. And you can't turn it off. You can't even adjust the volume or change the channel. It's just there. Part of what makes bad trips so terrifying is that it's you. You know, whatever it is that set you off down this path is going to be tailor-made for you by you. And thankfully, in most cases, the negative feelings are usually tied into the duration of the substance you've taken. So for instance, if you've taken mushrooms, then maybe you might have a really shitty time for say 3 or 4 hours. But after that, you begin to come out of it and the bad feelings subside as you return to normal. Now, as distressing as these experiences can be, in no way is this the worst thing that can happen. Some people can be quite gung-ho with psychedelics, thinking, well, if I have a bad trip, then it happens and I'll be fine by morning. No, it can get much worse, and that leads us to our second category, the long dark night of the soul. This is something that is quite common to people who've done something like an ayahuasca retreat, in that the retreat itself can go fine without anything significantly negative happening, but then later on, you begin to feel a kind of emotional turmoil, and this could be weeks or even months after the retreat has ended. This might manifest as strange thought patterns, a feeling of discomfort inside your own skin, emotional outbursts like sudden crying or mood swings. In short, you feel like you're going a bit nuts, but not enough that you can't keep a lid on it, but just enough that like your inner voices to be asking, am I losing my fucking mind here? This is what's commonly referred to as the integration period of a psychedelic experience. The logic here is that psychedelics smash open a lot of the structures that we have within our subconscious, which is why they can feel so awesome and liberating. The flip side to that though, is that those structures were also keeping back a lot of potentially unsettling thoughts and feelings, but without those emotional firewalls in place, well, then those feelings just come pouring out of you. Now, depending on your mental well-being will determine how much this will affect you. So that's the first thing to keep in mind when you decide to explore these altered states. Whatever demons that you had lurking in the background are going to take center stage. So make sure that you are prepared to face them. And take a moment to really think about what that means, to face your demons. We as humans are very good at nitpicking over trivial little details, but really bad at taking the time to consider what the possible long-term outcomes might be, and if we're prepared to live with it. So I would really urge you to think about how a psychedelic experience might impact your life if it goes completely wrong. Just take 5 minutes to put your bravado to one side and consider what that situation actually looks like. I think part of the problem here is that it's really seen as this kind of like binary scale. You are either fine or you've had a psychotic break and you end up in a straitjacket. But there is this huge landscape in the middle where you can be functionally okay, but mentally you can be really struggling. And this is one area where I can say I have had a lot of experience in. Usually in the weeks following one of my ayahuasca retreats, I'll find myself experiencing one of these long, dark nights of the soul, often for a couple of days at a time, some days tougher than others, and this will reoccur over a period of several weeks. Now again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's not like a headache or it's just something that sucks, but you have to suffer through it. With these kind of experiences, when all these weird feelings are coming up to the surface, then this is the time when the real work happens. This is a big part of this integration thing that people talk about. And you should ask yourself, why do I feel like this? What does this mean? What happens if I just sit here and let these feelings rise? The point here is that it's not just something to pointlessly endure. This is the work. This is what you signed up for. There's a phrase in ayahuasca circles that the ceremony is the easy part and the real hard work comes afterwards. And it's absolutely true. Anybody can swallow down some substances and trip their bollocks off. But getting something useful out of that experience, dealing with those complex emotions that you had buried deep and putting yourself back together again into something better. That's really fucking hard. And I'm not saying this as someone who claims to have done this 100% successfully. Not at all. But, I made progress. I feel like I'm further along that road now than I was before. But to be honest, it's a fucking long road and I'm not even sure it actually has an end. But still, just making that journey itself has a value. And when you're coming from one of these dark places of depression, grief, anxiety, PTSD, then you're going to have to face those things down. And these substances can help with doing that. And they do it by shining a really big spotlight on what is going on with you. And you might regret asking for that help because it can be very, very intense. Trust me, I know. And like I said before, there is no such thing as a free lunch here. But as with the previous category, it can get much worse. Mental destabilisation. This contrasts with the previous state in that the person is now struggling to function in everyday life. Now, I personally have not experienced this, but my wife has, and I've kept in touch with several people who I've been on retreats with whose life has just come crashing down because they weren't equipped to deal with what landed. And that's not a criticism of those people, by the way. For the people I'm talking about, we all rolled the same dice. And it's the luck of the draw that I get to sit here and tell you all about it, along with my other fantastic adventures, while they have to try and pull the head out of their own asses. It is a dice roll, and you need to accept that before you play. There are no guarantees that it's all going to turn out peachy for you. Someone very dear to me who went through this kind of long-term destabilising experience is my wife, Rachel. So I'm going to bring her in to talk a little bit about what she went through.
It was actually 2 trips in the jungle with ayahuasca. Yeah, basically the dose was too much for me. It started off manageable, and there was a point in which I realised that it was very quickly escalating, and I asked for help. I told the facilitator that I was dying, and then after that I just couldn't comprehend time, language, or anything. I got completely lost in it, and then I had the death experience. I died. It was very traumatic. And then after that in the morning I was just very shell-shocked. When I came back from the retreat, I felt great. Yeah, I felt clean, cleansed, and also full of fond memories of the good parts of the trip. And, you know, I felt sort of the afterglow from ayahuasca, and yeah, I was feeling very positive and thought that that was it.
How long was it before those feelings began to change into something more negative?
6 to 8 months. That manifested as unexplained weight loss and anxiety, persisting hallucination thing. You know, it wasn't constant, but there was a lot of, you know, times when I'd have visual distortions, or I would hear things that I didn't think were actually there, and also I'd get very triggered by a certain sound that reminded me of a sound that I'd heard in the jungle just before everything went under on this big trip, and that used to affect me quite a lot, like very viscerally. I had a physical reaction to it. I believe that the jungle experience triggered a relapse of my anorexia nervosa, and at the time I didn't know it was happening because it was different to any of the other episodes. Yeah, I had to live it, I think, to get that sort of, to take it seriously enough. I had to really feel like I was out of my depth with it, and that's exactly what has been happening. Yeah, by myself I seem to be out of my depth, and eventually I sought professional help. I am now in psychoanalysis. I'm also in the care of my doctor, who prescribed me benzodiazepines, and that in itself has been another difficulty that I faced. I just simply couldn't eat enough food to maintain my weight without them. But I didn't want to be on them for the rest of my life, and trying to come off them has been extremely challenging. I believe it's a positive thing on the whole, but it's something I grossly underestimated, the amount of work that needs to go into it, and just this concept of dark night of the soul. I mean, obviously it's not one night, and I wouldn't say I expected it to have gone on this long. It lasts a long time, and it's deeper and darker than I could have ever imagined. I wish I'd known what was in store for me.
So yeah, shit can get real. And remember, this is coming from people who hold psychedelics in high regard. How to deal with bad trips. I've covered quite a few different scenarios here, and there are a number of things you can do to cope with one of these situations if it happens to you. Now, the first is to just be aware of all the things that we've talked about here, so that it's not a complete shock to your system if it happens to you. Like I've described here, a lot of these feelings are completely normal. So if you're going to try and heal some deep-rooted trauma, then be prepared that you're going to have to face that down. One useful strategy is that before you go into one of these experiences, maybe write it down in a journal, just exactly what you expect and what you are prepared for. And this will give you something to refer back to if the shit hits the fan later on. And you can remind yourself, this is what you signed up for. This is what you expected. The other thing that is very helpful is to have a clear intention for what it is you are trying to accomplish by going into these altered states. Keep in mind what it is you're trying to do, and that will help you frame it into this bigger picture. Again, a good analogy I like to use here is for someone who's been to the gym and done a really tough workout, and then they wake up the next day with their muscles in complete agony. Now, that person can frame that pain as an extremely positive thing. Even though they're suffering, it's a sign that they've done a lot of hard work the day before. But now just imagine if that person had amnesia and completely forgot that the day before they'd been to the gym, and they wake up with every limb in pain and every movement feeling stiff and sore. Now, if that person had no frame of reference, they'd wake up feeling like something had gone seriously wrong with their body, and they would rightfully begin to panic. And I think this is how most of us are about our mental state. We have amnesia about what came before. And so when we unleash it via something like psychedelics, we don't have that frame of reference which tells us, hey, this is okay. This is just the ache from the gym. It's fine. It makes sense that you would feel like this. Knowing what you're getting yourself into and having a clear intention are two principles which can save you a lot of grief and suffering. In regards to the long dark night of the soul stuff that I mentioned earlier, then I have a previous video all about how to integrate those experiences. So I'll link to that somewhere up there. So go and check that out. Finally, if you feel like you are completely destabilized and are losing your ability to function as a human being, then seek advice. It doesn't have to be a doctor or a shrink. It could just be a trusted friend or family member as a first port of call, but go to someone who you can trust, someone who can talk openly and honestly about what you're experiencing, and someone who has your best interests in mind. Okay, that was a pretty heavy topic, so I'm gonna have to try and balance this out with my next video being about kittens or something. But to wrap all this up, I hope that didn't come across as too scary or fear-mongering, or like I was trying to put anyone off using these substances. For anyone who thinks that, just go and check out the rest of my channel, and as you will see, I'm a huge fan of what these substances can offer us. But we need to be honest in our discussions so that people are prepared and can get the best possible outcomes from using them. As always, I want to say a big thank you to you guys for watching, and especially to those who support me on Patreon. I do this primarily as a hobby, but it does have expenses associated with it. So just like the other day, I had to spend $150 on a new hard drive for my computer so I can do the editing. So for those who find value in what I do and throw a few coins my way, I am very much appreciative, and rest assured it all goes back into the channel. If you like the content of these videos, then press the like button. I'm not sure it actually does anything, but other than virtually stroke my ego, but if you've watched this far and you've been somewhat entertained, then it seems like a fair exchange. So yeah, press the button. If you want to keep up to date with new stuff as I publish it, then press the subscribe button. And if you want to ask me anything, then you can do so via my subreddit, which is linked in the channel banner. And yeah, that's about it. Stay safe, guys. I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you next time.